Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We begin, as I think we must, with the B word. One of the nice things for me about discussing Jeremy Corbyn is that unless you've got rocks for brains, you will know that I have no fear or favour for the man. I historically lean a little bit more towards generous, compassionate, Christian, therefore leftish positions than I do towards selfish alternatives. But Jeremy Corbyn, to me, has been a leader of quite remarkable inadequacy. And worse at times. But even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And his Brexit policy in the run-up to the imminent, or at least inevitable, election has finally been clarified. He will offer to negotiate a Brexit deal involving a customs union. Okay, this is ahead of conference next week. And he will also promise a second referendum in the event of that deal being successfully or unsuccessfully negotiated. A Labour government would secure a sensible deal based on the terms we have long advocated, including a new customs union with the EU, a close single market relationship and guarantees of workers' rights and environmental protections. I suspect that gets filed under rule taker, not rule maker, doesn't it? And would be for many people, for almost everybody, I think, on either side still of this evil old fence, it would still be unsatisfactory. It's a bit. I always think of Rory Stewart at this point, and his valiant attempts to say the only way out of this mess is to disappoint everybody a bit, rather than disappointing half of the people a lot, and the other half not a jot. That ain't ever going to happen. So, what do you reckon? That's it. 0345 6060 973.
Well, as for where the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, will sit on any Brexit referendum, the answer might turn out to be on the fence, after an article he wrote in today's Guardian newspaper. Must be getting very uncomfortable there. He says if Labour won the next election, he would negotiate a new Brexit deal with the EU and then offer a second referendum on whether to accept it or remain. We have seen just about everything when it comes to Brexit is true, but a leader failing to campaign for a deal he had himself negotiated would be yet another new first.
It's been a long road for Jeremy Corbyn. In the 1975 referendum on Britain's membership of the EEC, he voted against. In 2016, he campaigned for Remain. He was against a second referendum. Now he's for one. What remains a mystery is which way he would campaign in that second vote. For Remain again, for his own Brexit deal, or neither. This was his answer when asked which he would prefer today.
I want the people to have a choice between the offer of remaining in the EU and the offer of an agreement with the EU, which will give us a trade relationship, which will give us a customs union, will give us rights, consumer rights, workers' rights and environmental standards. That is a credible choice, and my job as Prime Minister would be to deliver that option that is chosen by the British people.
Labour's Brexit policy has yet to make an indelible mark in Leave voting areas like Sedgefield.
Do you know what the Labour Party's position on Brexit is? I promise you it's not a trick question.
No. Not a clue.
No.
Because they all just go round and round.
Confused.com. It's like a roundabout.
Their MP just wants his leader to make a choice.
We just need a bit of clarity. It's the biggest issue facing this country in peacetime for 100 years. And I think the leader of the opposition needs to take a stand, ultimately, one way or the other.
Others have decided. Today, the Welsh Labour leader said his party would campaign for Remain.
Very pleased indeed that Labour will offer that second vote to people. We've been campaigning for that for a long time. But when a second referendum comes, then we will be campaigning to remain in the European Union, because that is the right answer for Wales.
But Mr Corbyn also declined to say whether or not he would remain neutral. So determined is Jeremy Corbyn to sit on the fence over this that he won't even confirm whether that's where he intends to remain. But with so many Labour voters in favour of Brexit, it may yet turn out to be quite clever politics, even if, in the meantime, it opens him to the accusation of poor leadership. Carl Dinnan, News at 10 at Labour Party headquarters.
I'm going to put an early example of ignorance up, and I do this occasionally. I could have checked this before coming on air. I elected not to because I think sometimes the uncertainty reflects the country more than the setting out of a stall that is built upon relatively certain foundations. Where would freedom of movement fit into this Labour deal involving a customs union and a close single market relationship? It would solve the problems of the British border in Ireland, I think. But if you've got customs union, then you've got, I think, a sort of de facto membership. I can't think of any countries that are in a customs union with the European Union that would be able or fit the description that Brexiters have of this brave new dawn. I don't know. That's one of the things I'm going to leave undecided until you decide it for me. As ever, when we discuss voting intentions, we have to sort of pretend that we live in a slightly different system from the ones that we actually inhabit. There's no point ringing me, for example, to tell me it doesn't matter what Joe Swinson or Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson or Ian Blackford or Plaid Cymru, whatever they may do, or the Green Party, because they will never win in my constituency. I fully understand that. And I recognise that it makes some of the conversations we have in this field slightly theoretical. But there's no harm in that. Theoretical is good. So how do you feel about this offer from this party? And I'm interested, as ever, when we discuss voting intentions, in people who are changing, floating, of course, is the phrase we should use. People who might actually be winnable in the context of the shifting sands of these various pledges and promises. So I don't know what the Conservatives would go into an election offering if they had failed to do or die on October the 31st. Again, it's looking very tricky to deliver on that, but who knows? So we know what the Liberal Democrats will go into the election offering. They will go into the general election offering a revocation of Article 50 if they win. If they don't win, obviously they will not be able to provide or offer that. There was some, I presume, genuine confusion yesterday about an apparent contradiction at the heart of the Liberal Democrats' position. I don't see the contradiction. They're saying if we win, we revoke Article 50. If we don't win, obviously we'll throw our weight behind support for a second referendum, which is their only option. I think I've understood that correctly. Labour saying we could do a better job. Essentially what Brexiters have spent the last 3 years saying to Theresa May originally. We could do a better job. We got a better plan. Goes to a different school. Can't tell you what it is yet, but my goodness me, it's a plan. The more, and slowly recognising his own powerlessness in the face of the shifting sands of office or palace politics presided over by his two evil daughters, Goneril and Regan. So there's an element of that. We can do a better job than what's been done already. We just can't tell you what it is yet. Except that he has told you. He's told you that it will involve customs union and close single market relationship. I don't see how that can entail the abolition of freedom of movement that Theresa May was so excited about. But equally, we now know that we don't need to get excited about the abolition of freedom of movement. If you really feel you have to throw a bone to the how can I politely describe them? The immigration obsessives, then you can do it under single market membership terms anyway. So where does that leave you? And I'm not going to be choosy. Well, I'd be choosy. We're always choosy. I'm not going to be dismissive of people whose position would not shift regardless of what Jeremy Corbyn, Boris Johnson or Joe Swinson or any of the other party leaders did. But I am really interested in whether or not this will make it easier or harder for you to vote Labour. It's 12 minutes after 10. I think it would make it easier for me. I prioritise minimising Brexit, minimising the negative impacts of Brexit above anything else in British politics at the moment. I don't necessarily mean by that I prioritise remaining. I mean I prioritise minimising the negative impacts of Brexit, which are, we know, going to be considerable. And that seems to me to be the only rational position you can take with regard to the national interest. But I appreciate that lots of people don't see it that way. So if you don't see it that way, then nothing Corbyn does is going to put any butter in your spinach, as the French say in French. I don't imagine. But if you're wavering, do you know, actually, sorry, I'm waffling a bit because I'm trying to pinpoint the precise constituency that I'd love to talk to this morning. I want to know whether Conservative voters could countenance a Labour vote now that Corbyn... Conservative voters who, like me, want to either prevent or minimise the negative impact of Brexit, particularly of a no-idea kamikaze Brexit. Could this tempt you temporarily into the Labour fold? Or will some of the other attendant issues that hang about Corbyn like a particularly unpleasant odour still manage to get up your nostrils despite you holding your nose while you try to put an X in the Labour box? It's 14 minutes after 10. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I invite your calls this morning on the very simple question of whether Jeremy Corbyn's offer is one that you can refuse. I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit. I should just add in, before we go to the break, the final platform of this offer is that neutrality. So he will, I mean, as it stands, he'll get a deal, he says, and we'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that, although there are some questions hanging over that putative deal. He'll get a deal, he'll put it on a referendum ballot paper which also has Remain on it, and he will stay neutral. So he won't even campaign in support of his own deal or in support of the policy that the massive majority of his party wants. Now, you could describe that as prevarication. I think at 10:15 this morning, I am, in all honesty and in good faith, going to describe it as pragmatism. I may even resist the urge to point out that when I struggled to understand the appeal of Jeremy Corbyn back in the day, many of you pointed out that it was his absence and rejection of pragmatism that made him the absolute boy. He will stick to his guns regardless of what might accelerate his passage to power. I didn't buy it then, I don't really buy it now, but I can offer up gentle applause for this policy because it is pragmatic. It recognises the problems potentially faced by some of his MPs in constituencies where the vote to leave was very, very heavy, but it also recognises the changed realities of 2019/20 versus 2016. So I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit. A nifty little piece of pragmatism, or yet more evidence that Corbyn couldn't punch his way out of the proverbial wet paper bag. Neutrality on the part of a leader who has never been a full-throated supporter of Remain and is widely suspected of being quite an enthusiastic supporter of leaving, but he leads a party that is not. And he recognises that in the latest clarification of what Labour will do in the coming months, and what they will do is this: I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit. So you go into an election offering to negotiate a Brexit deal, and he would then put that deal on a ballot paper with Remaining and let the country decide. Does it have a no deal at all option on the ballot paper? I should probably have triple checked that before I came on air. Leave it with me. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. Daniel's in Newton Abbot. Daniel, what do you reckon?
Well, thanks for taking my call, James. Look, I was a passionate leaver. I mean, I wasn't just a passionate leaver. I drove people to the booth to vote Leave as well.
Okay.
One of the big reasons, and this is very important, that I wanted out of Europe was because they were pushing for something called TTIP.
Not in 2016. It was done and dusted by then, mate.
But okay, but there
was still a lot of propaganda around suggesting that TTIP would involve us carving up the NHS and selling it off to American interests. But TTIP, as you know now, TTIP is dead and buried.
Well, TTIP is dead and buried. Yes. But if you listen to Theresa May come back a little while after when she was doing the negotiations, said there would be a TPP-style deal in the makings. But either way, that was why I wanted to get out. Now, after the vote, obviously, the EU voted TTIP down, so I should have stayed in, and I would vote to remain now. So I'm quite emotional about this, because I was fooled. But
you weren't fooled. Sorry, I don't want to add to your burdens. I mean, the way the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership was portrayed, it was a proposed trade agreement between the whole of the European Union and the United States, and there was a lot in it that was deeply problematical. And so I mean, by all means get emotional, mate, but don't be hard on yourself. There's a lot of effort put into persuading you to do what you do by clever, wealthy, powerful people. So be kind to yourself, Daniel. Be kind.
Well, thank you. I mean, I would vote Remain now, because there are things I don't like about the EU, but any sort of agreement with America scares the life out of me, because I won't go into it too much because it's not the subject. Okay. The point is, Jeremy Corbyn is I'm not a big fan of his. I would never naturally vote for someone like him. But the problem is that he's the only person offering a customs union. Now, I know it's not going to be for everyone's taste, but a customs union takes any trade with America out of the equation, because a customs union means that we have to retain all of the workers' rights, all of the animal welfare
Again, sorry
rights.
to be pedantic, but to clarify, I mean, we'll be able to trade with America to our... Well, not to our heart's content, but we won't be compelled to accept their standards in various areas, which are, I think everyone agrees, lower than the European Union. So
oh yeah, no,
that's the bottom line.
I used to be on active marches against TTIP. Again, I could spend a long time talking about it if you'd like to, but the point is that I want to make is that I keep saying Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party putting forward this customs union proposal is the only way that I can see that we could actually get out of the political framework.
But isn't that interesting? So your position has shifted 180 degrees on the same axis, Daniel. It is this desire not to... I mean, you're right. Now's not the time for a deep dive into TTIP, not least because you're clearly a lot more qualified to undertake that deep dive than I am.
Please ring me up if you ever do.
I don't need to now, because you know the phrase that they've used, and you'll like this. 4 words. 5 words even. Obsolete and no longer relevant. That is what the European Commission called the TTIP negotiations in April of this year. Obsolete and no longer relevant. So you can sleep easy. But your fears of us being somehow compelled to adopt American standards in various areas motivated your Leave vote, and the same fears today would motivate a Remain vote. And both positions are rational.
Exactly. So, thank you for understanding me. I voted out because I didn't want part of TTIP, and now I want to vote back in because I still don't want TTIP under any guise. And you asked the question, Quay Bono, who benefits. I think apart from the hedge funds, you might want to be looking at which of these passionate Brexiteers have got interest in American companies. I won't name them and libel myself, but if you look at the ones that...
Wouldn't be liable. It would be liable to suggest that they were... potential liable. It'd be very hard to prove to suggest that they were prioritising personal profit above national interest, and therefore...
fair enough. If it's all right, then look at what Liam...
No, I didn't mean that. I mean, if they have interest in American companies, there's nothing libelous about saying so. But yeah, you're right. Have a look into it, like Daniel suggests. See who has interest in American health insurance firms, for example. It might prove... illuminating, but no suggestion from either of us that any Brexiters named on this programme or otherwise have nefarious or corrupt intent. 25 minutes after 10. Daniel, that was lovely, actually, and what a lovely illustration of how these conversations can go if everybody keeps their hair on, so to speak, because I think both of those positions were rational. He so passionate, and we will find out why another time, passionately opposed to that trade and investment partnership that was under discussion, I think, at the time of the vote. The largest bilateral trade initiative ever attempted, I think it was. Spooked Daniel to such a degree that he voted to leave the European Union. Of course, leaving the European Union raises the spectre of the United Kingdom negotiating a bilateral trade agreement with America, which would be even more likely, I suspect, to see our end of the deal kowtowing to their demands in the context of standards and safety. So it was out of the frying pan into the fire, but I don't blame him for making that leap. I can see precisely why he did it, and I absolutely applaud him for having the perspicacity to say, well, I'd do the opposite today. And I think I'd be holding my nose by voting for Jeremy Corbyn. 26 minutes after 10. Where are you on this one? Adam's in Greenwich. Adam, what do you... Hang on, I've got a couple of phone lines free for one, so if you've failed to get through on a Brexit-related topic for the last 3 years, have a crack now. Adam's in Greenwich. Adam, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Well, I mean, listening to your intro there, and in answer to your question, I mean, on the content...
Can't hear you, unfortunately. We'll try and sort that out and get back to you. Dave's on Merseyside, or in Liverpool. Dave, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Nice to talk to you. First time I've spoken to you.
Likewise, Dave.
I think this is a very good proposal, and it does remind me, because I'm 54 and I was a geek in 1975 when we had the first referendum after the Conservatives brought us into the EEC in 1973. We had the Labour Party then in government from 74 onwards had a referendum in 75, and the government they had a free vote on it. So some people in the government campaigned to remain in the EEC, and other people in the government campaigned to leave the EEC.
But Cameron did that as well. He let Cabinet go both ways, didn't he? Otherwise, Gove wouldn't have been running vote leave.
Yeah, but there's a difference here.
Go on, what?
The difference is this. It was the Labour government that first brought along a referendum about being in the EEC or not.
Yeah.
And it was the Labour government in 75 that said it's a free vote, anyone can go either way. Now, in this context where we are now, and a general election is impending in November, if Labour take power, it's actually saying to the nation, you have three choices. Some of our people in our party will offer one choice, some of our people will offer another, but it's down to you. You now have a qualified choice of remaining, leaving, or taking a better negotiated deal by a Labour government. That really is pragmatism in action, and empowering the people to make this time an informed decision.
Do you know, I'm sorry to be boring. I just dropped the ball a bit on what the difference is between this offer and what Wilson offered, or Heath. Because they both let their senior politicians campaign for either side, didn't they?
No, but hang on a minute, James.
I'm hanging.
You have to recognise that in 1975, it was the Labour government that said, we will now give the nation a choice to stay in or leave. So it was the Labour government that gave the nation an opportunity to have an input in being in the EEC or not.
And it was the Conservative government that did the same in 2016. I think I'm being a bit thick, clearly. Sorry, mate.
No, James, what I'm trying to say is it was the Conservative government that brought Britain into the EEC in 1973.
No, I know all this. This is just chronology. But here's the question: what is the difference? Hang on. What's the difference between Corbyn saying I'll be neutral and Heath and Wilson saying, all right, lads and lasses, you can campaign either way on this one?
Right, the difference is this, right, it was either stay or remain. It was either remain or leave.
Yeah.
In the last two.
Okay. So this is a vote for what remaining looks like versus what leaving actually looks like, rather than the... no, I've got to crack on because I'm late for the news, and I apologise to everybody for being a bit dopey during the course of that exchange with Dave. Dave, the next time, mate, I'll take a vitamin before you come on, and I promise. Or a slurp of green tea, and I promise I'll be more on the ball. 10:30 is the time. If you want to have a giggle, all right, I think I can guarantee a giggle today. Late last night, coming home on the tube, I tweeted a relatively decent gag about Liz Truss and her apologies over accidentally breaching a pledge not to licence exports to Saudi Arabia. It was a sarcastic gag designed, obviously, to suggest that who here can honestly say that they've never accidentally broken the legal requirements not to license exports to Saudi Arabia? In her defence, she's bravely carrying the mantle of Chris Grayling into the new dawn of Boris Johnson's regime. Her defence was that it was an accident. She's great. It gives hope to my 11-year-old, perhaps, next time she accidentally paints a back wall in the garden. But if you go onto my Twitter feed and have a look at the replies to that, because they're brilliant. They are so funny, and I will share some of them with you in the course of the programme. There's also a picture of Marc Francois dressed up as a police officer, which will also put a smile on your face. But we must return to more important matters, considerably more serious matters, to wit the reconvening of the Supreme Court in London this morning. It is the government's turn, or at least the government's lawyers' turn, to put their case, and LBC's chief reporter Matthew Thompson is here to provide us with a sort of analysis of what we can expect today, Matthew.
Well, James, today what we're having is another set of lawyers who'll be standing up and arguing one way or the other in each of these two twin cases, which are diametrically opposed to one another. Of course, we have the High Court case in England, in the case brought by Gina Miller, which ruled that prorogation of Parliament was simply not a matter for the courts. It was a political matter, not a legal one. And then opposed to that, we had the Scottish court, which ruled that actually prorogation was unlawful. So what we're having this morning is the government will be presenting its arguments. Who's doing it right now, actually, James Eadie QC, speaking for the government, who will be arguing, in fact, that this is not a matter for the courts, and he's going to be illustrating the reasons why the government thinks, as they did indeed yesterday as well, why this is not something the courts can rule on. And then later on, we're going to have lawyers for the Scottish case, for Joanna Cherry QC, who's herself a lawyer, of course, and other MPs, and they will be arguing that the Scottish court was right to rule that Parliament was unlawful. But at the heart of this case, James, there are two questions. The first is, does the court have the authority to rule on these matters? And the second is, if it does, is that suspension of Parliament unlawful? And the cases hinge on the same essential argument. Yesterday, what we got from the government, presumably what we'll be getting throughout the morning this morning, is the idea that Parliament can be prorogued for a number of reasons, and those can be political reasons. Yesterday we got precedent from 1911, from 1930, from 1948, all of which indicated that there have been political reasons for proroguing Parliament. And the government's lawyers are arguing, well, look, if there has been past precedent for politically proroguing Parliament, then who's to say whether these political reasons are illegitimate or not? It's simply not a matter for the courts because there's no legal standard by which to judge it, against which the opponents, Gina Miller's lawyer yesterday and presumably the Scottish case lawyers today, will be saying that actually no, law dictates, or our constitutional settlement dictates, that powers can be exercised by ministers only insofar as they are properly used. They don't have unlimited authority to use these powers, and they have to be done within the certain context and in the means, for the purpose for which they were intended. And they argue, and they argued yesterday, that that is not this case. That the reason that Parliament has been prorogued is deliberately to stop it scrutinising the government. As such, the government shouldn't be able to do it.
Okay.
And that is what it hinges on. And the reason this is so significant, James, is because the Supreme Court is being asked to weigh in, basically, on totally uncharted territory. Raphael Hogarth put it quite succinctly in the Times this morning. They're ploughing a route through the middle of our constitutional settlement without a map. Yes. And it will fundamentally decide for generations where the balance between politics and the law lies. And that's why, beyond its impact on Brexit, which we can analyse, but that is why this is such a significant
case. It runs much deeper than that. David Allen Green, the legal expert who made many new friends on this programme last week, is fond of pointing out constitutional law can indeed be absolutely fascinating, but it shouldn't be, and we should all be a little bit worried when it is.
Exactly, and the fact that it speaks volumes about where we are and where this crisis, this gridlock between executive and legislature has brought us. And the third element of the separation of powers is the courts, and fundamentally they will have to decide whether this is an instance in which they can intervene, and if they do, that will radically reconfigure the way it'll move to a much more sort of United States model of government where the Supreme Court intervenes on matters of politics.
As the saying goes, it could change everything. Final question, when do you think the result will drop?
So this is the second of 3 days of evidence. Tomorrow will be a bit of a bombshell day as well, because we're expecting an intervention from the lawyer of a former Conservative Prime Minister, John Major, arguing in the highest court in the land against a current Conservative Prime Minister. That sentence in itself is extraordinary.
Isn't it just?
But we'll get that tomorrow, and then there may be a judgment at the the end of play tomorrow. That's the earliest that we can expect it. But I would have thought after 3 days of evidence and on a matter quite this serious, they'll want to take some time before considering their various judgments. So we might expect it a day or so after that.
Great stuff. LBC's chief reporter Matthew Thompson giving you a thumbnail sketch of not only what is happening in the Supreme Court, but why it is of almost unprecedented import. It's 22:11. I will stay neutral. Don't worry, not me. And let people decide on Brexit, says Jeremy Corbyn. Does that put butter in your spinach? Robert is in Rochester. Robert, what do you reckon?
I think it's a complete load of tosh, to be completely frank. I think all he's trying to do is stop the coal of votes leaving the Labour Party when it comes to the general election. And I think he's playing for the wrong move.
Who do you think he's playing to?
He's trying to allow Northern MPs to basically campaign during the general election that is going to happen, to vote to leave, and to Southern to remain, which is what he's been playing at ever since this referendum came apart. And to be completely frank,
What would you rather he did?
Oh, this is what I was just about to explain.
Yeah.
The Liberal Democrats want to revoke Article 50, blah, 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 blah. You've got the Brexit Party, which wants a hard Brexit. You've got the Tories, which are stating they want a deal and have created the Theresa May deal, which has been rejected. But there's no one that's sensible in the middle of all of that, which would be, there is already a middle ground. It already exists. It's called the economic area. And as we would be literally the size of the economic area when it comes to population, things like Northern Ireland could be addressed by...
So what would you put, just briefly, mate, what would you put in the manifesto then if you were Jeremy Corbyn?
I would put in the manifesto common sense approach. Let's look at
what you think other politicians are going to put down? We won't use common sense. They all use common sense. I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit. That's an incredibly easy to understand message, but it doesn't work with you. So what would you prefer in a sentence? What would you put instead of that sentence there? I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit. What would you prefer?
I would prefer that the people of the UK have made their decision. However,
well, then he loses the support of his own party, pal. Which is, I mean,
that's why I was
not really common sense, is it? So let's try again. In a sentence, I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit.
However, most people.
Sorry, I'll give you one more chance. In a sentence, the better message, the better offer.
The better offer would be looking at the centre ground and offering...
I think everyone will agree I gave you a fair crack of the whip there, mate, but it's I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit. That's the definition of the centre ground. Graham's in Pontypridd. Graham, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Graham.
Well, I think it's a marvellous proposal.
Do you?
I really do. I lay out my stall. I and my family are ardent Remainers.
Yes.
We voted Remain in 2016. We will vote Remain again if that's on the ballot paper, which is something that he promises will happen.
Well, that's true, yes.
So we will vote Remain again. But if there is a centre ground, if there is something that's going to pull votes in as far as the Labour Party are concerned on this, it's going to be going for a deal much like Norway. Now, that's all that nobody's mentioned the EU yet, really, as far as their negotiated position is concerned, because they will accept an EEA deal much like Norway. And I think
probably they will. Almost certainly they will. There were some noises from Norway at one point about, look at the mess you've made of your Brexit. We don't want you coming over here and spoiling our party. And there are some suggestions that the better precedent, this is the problem with not defining exactly what is meant by a strong relationship with the single market. Does that mean we'll be like Norway or that we'll be like Turkey?
Well, I think it's going to be more like Norway. That's what he's going to go for, I think, anyway. But if there's a preference vote, it's going to be, for me anyway, and my family, is going to be Remain first and the deal second.
And the clever bit here...
type deal.
Yeah, well, exactly. But the clever bit, perhaps, and I think it is quite clever, in electoral terms, in pragmatic terms, is that it means that he can fight if he wins an election and promises the second referendum, which is for people like you and me, that's a powerful incentive to support them in a general election before we get to this next referendum.
Definitely.
But it means that unlike David Cameron, he won't have to resign if the referendum goes one way as opposed to the other. He can. The neutrality lets him actually promise to carry out whatever the public decides. While senior members of his party, one thinks of McDonnell, Thornbury, Tom Watson, various other senior shadow cabinet figures, would all campaign tirelessly to Remain, but it wouldn't, if they lost, involve Corbyn having to hand in his cards, which I think is quite clever, isn't it?
I think it's more than that. I don't think he's out for himself here. What he genuinely is trying to do is say, well, look, let's put it back to the people. Here's the deal that we're going to negotiate. If it's good enough, you'll accept it. Yeah. It's the middle ground. I mean, how many people have phoned into you, James, who were really passionate leavers, but have now said, oh no, I'd vote Remain now.
Oh, well, hundreds and hundreds. Exactly. Is a slight exaggeration, but they're all fake, Graham. You have to keep up on social media. They're all on a sabbatical from the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, or my mates putting on comedy voices. None of them are real people.
Yeah, well, you and I know different. And I speak to people all the time who, not all the time, but I mean, I speak to people often who were leavers who would now say, no way.
Well, the first caller today was a beautiful example of that. He didn't mention immigration, didn't mention any of the things that they keep telling us were the driving forces. He was interested in future trading agreements between America and the single market of which he is a part. And the single market he was a part of then was the European Union. The single market he'd be a part of after a no-deal Brexit would be the UK, and the threat of sacrificing some of our standards on the altar of trade with America becomes more acute, not less acute, so he reverses his vote for what struck me as perfectly rational reasons. Thank you, Graham. 10:47 is the time. I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit. He's trying to be all things to all people in a way, but not in another way, in the sense that he's not telling one side that he'll do X and another side that he'll do Y, and just crossing his fingers when X and Y collide, which I think is possibly what happened to Boris Johnson during the leadership election. He managed to persuade people that he was serious about pursuing a deal, and simultaneously managed to persuade people that he was serious about crashing out without any deal. That was a deft bit of politicking. I think Corbyn deserves a similar description this morning. A deft bit of politics, this. Albeit that I would prefer to see a Labour leader offering full-throated support for the national interest and putting forward a very compelling case as to what the national interest is. He's not going to do that. You can make a sound defence of his decision not to do that, or you can make a cynical one or an uncharitable one. But we'll have another referendum. I, as Prime Minister, won't pick a side. I'll just promise to do whatever the people decide. What's wrong with that? It's 10:48. Let's cast our eyes a little further afield, staying with politics, staying indeed with electoral arithmetic, even more pertinently in the context of the Israeli election, where results appeared overnight. The Jerusalem correspondent for The Times, and indeed a biographer of Benjamin Netanyahu, Anshel Pfeffer, joins me on the line now. I mean, you're looking, I think, Anshel, at a long period of cattle trading now, right? As Netanyahu tries to put together a government, despite having secured fewer seats than he did last time, and last time he failed to put together a government.
Well, we've got a similar situation to what you have now in the UK. We have a Prime Minister in office who's lost his majority, and the leader of the opposition who can't dislodge him because he can't form a government either. So it's quite reminiscent of what you have with Boris and Corbyn now.
It's not dissimilar. I mean, how do you see it shaking down?
Well, the thing is, Netanyahu set himself a target of, I mean, he dissolved the Israeli parliament, except 5 months ago, and set himself a target of winning a majority this time, at least of one seat. And instead of improving his showing from the last election and getting that majority, he's lost 3 or 4 seats, and the gap is even larger.
Well, that's the Theresa May tactic. So the echoes are quite profound, aren't they, with UK politics? That's exactly what Theresa May did a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and, you know, Theresa May wasn't seen as one of the best campaigners or political tacticians. Netanyahu has been seen for many years, both here in Israel and abroad, as a magician, someone who's won election after election in using very unorthodox tactics. So this has certainly been a breaking of the Netanyahu spell. The magic has evaporated.
That's an interesting way of putting it. This is the lowest he's been. This is the worst position he's been in since he became Prime Minister.
Well, since he returned to office in 2009, certainly. I mean, he's lost elections in the past, but sorry, for the last decade he has been omnipotent, and his only way of remaining in office now will probably be some kind of power sharing agreement, and for him, this is a huge downgrade.
Of course, and Gantz, the leader of the other party to get about 32 seats in the Knesset, he has mooted the possibility of doing a unity government with Likud, Netanyahu's party, but not with the same leader. Is there any mileage in that, do you think? I appreciate everything's up in the air at the moment, but could you imagine that happening?
You know, Gantz has repeatedly made the commitment that he would not sit under Netanyahu or with Netanyahu in the government, because Netanyahu is facing now corruption charges. He may be indicted very soon. So that's his obstacle for putting together a coalition. He'll sit with Likud without Netanyahu, but Netanyahu won't relinquish power. So one of these two gentlemen are going to have to give or find a way to compromise. And meanwhile, like you said, we have weeks of cattle trading and very, very detailed and drawn out coalition negotiations ahead of us if we want to avoid a third election here.
If you were a betting man, would you put much money on avoiding that third election?
I think that, with the exception perhaps of Netanyahu and a very tiny band of supporters, everyone here is united everyone in the political scene is united in doing everything to prevent another election, and I think they'll find a way to either compromise with Netanyahu, somehow ease him out of position, or perhaps set up a minority government. There are so many permutations and scenarios here. But what's really happened is the fact that Netanyahu, his hold is broken. He's no longer this frightening figure that really everyone...
And he did pull out all the stops yesterday, didn't he? All the old tactics arguably went even further than he had done before in some of the nastier end of politicking.
He took out all his tricks out of his bag and they all took them all up to 11, and this is really like Netanyahu's biggest hit.
Yeah.
But in the same way, sometimes the confidence trick says if he uses the same card trick more than too many times, his audience can see through him. I think that's what we saw here yesterday in the election. Many of these great gestures that he made, these big campaign promises, which perhaps in the past would have motivated some of his supporters, were duds, and they didn't really impress voters that much. They were seen as being empty promises, and the Netanyahu magic is fading, but not necessarily faded. Anshel Pfeffer, many thanks indeed. Anshel's book, The Turbulent Life and Times of Benjamin Netanyahu, is a very good guide to all of the issues attendant upon not just that man, but of course the broader picture of Israeli politics. 10:59 is the time. We return from Israeli politics to British politics, because I still want to take a couple more of your calls on Jeremy Corbyn's offer. I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit. With the greatest of love and respect to a caller who tried to argue about common sense and the centre ground, I think every cogent contribution in the first hour has been quite welcoming of this, but I haven't heard... Actually, that's not true, is it? The constituency of people who don't hold much of a torch for Corbyn, or any torch at all. I'm really looking for Conservative voters who don't want to leave the European Union or want to minimise the madness as effectively as they can. Are you surprised this morning to find yourself looking at this "I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit" offer and thinking, well, you're only Prime Minister for 5 years. The kamikaze Brexit could
could take generations to reverse. You know what? I'll give old Jezza a chance. A little further, actually. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. I think that Corbyn has outmanoeuvred Joe Swinson, the new leader of the Liberal Democrats. I think this offer, I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit, is probably the smartest move Jeremy Corbyn has made as Labour leader. There you go. Respond. And respond particularly, and I don't want to alienate or exclude anybody else, but particularly if you belong to this weird constituency. It's a constituency that contains Ken Clarke, it contains Sir John Major, it contains most of the senior most of the most impressive senior Conservatives of the last generation or two. You know, you look at who lines up to say don't do this, and you sort of find yourself in bed with politicians that you never thought you'd have much common ground with. The best illustration of that, of course, is that later today in our Supreme Court, a former Conservative Prime Minister will challenge the current Conservative Prime Minister on the legality of his actions in the House of Commons. I mean, it's incredible times. So, does that unprecedented landscape actually lend itself to you, much to your own shock, going, blimey, yeah. Actually, I mean, things could hardly be much worse than they are now. Corbyn still obviously has the stench of anti-Semitism hanging around him and many of his closest advisors. I make no light work of that. But you look at the Conservative Party, and if your vote is in any way persuaded by fears of bigotry, then it's a rock and a hard place, I'm afraid. It's not that you suddenly find yourself fleeing to the Conservative Party and their Islamophobia because you're so spooked by the anti-Semitism party that still plagues the Labour Party. I hope that doesn't sound insensitive. I'm trying to sound pragmatic, but I think Corbyn might actually have cracked it. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. Charlie's in Reigate. Charlie, what do you think?
How are you, James? Nice to speak to you at last.
Likewise, Charlie. What's on your mind?
I've been trying to get through for about a year now. Good job you didn't answer my call first, because you would have slaughtered me. Absolutely ruined me.
Nonsense.
I initially voted Leave.
Yes.
I'm a Conservative voter. Always have been. I voted for the bus. I voted for the National Health Service.
Fair enough.
Now we all know where we are with it. Fair enough. But actually, the fault of actually Jeremy Corbyn running this country as a businessman, as a man that employs 4 people.
Yeah.
I've got a showroom. I've got responsibilities to my employees.
Yes.
That man, in my eyes, would penalise me for going to work and working hard.
How?
And trying to do well for myself. Well, what's his name? John McDonnell put out the other day that he's going to, everybody that runs a business that's worth so much, he's going to make them give all the employees 15% each. The 4-day working week.
I don't think the 4-day working week is a manifesto pledge.
Yeah, he's to me, Jeremy Corbyn will say anything to get his foot through that black door.
Well, he won't say I support Remain.
Well, but he does support Remain, though, doesn't he?
Well, I don't think he does, oddly. And if he did, why wouldn't he say so? You just said he'll say anything to get his foot through the door.
Well, the man spent his whole career voting against anything to do with the European Union.
Exactly. Well, you're the one who said he's a Remainer. You're making my arguments for me now, Charlie.
Sorry, he doesn't. As a businessman, that man, in my eyes, would penalise me.
I know, and I hear that, and I feel it, but you know what I do? You know what I do now? I remind you that the employee ownership scheme would be for companies with 250 or more employees.
Yeah, but it's still... That man that owns that company has still got out of bed at 5:30 in the morning, James. He probably doesn't.
Not when he's got 250 employees, Charlie. When he's got 250 employees, he's paying people to get out of bed at 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah, it's still. But why should people give their wealth up that they've worked for?
Because, but what I mean, I like that question, and I think I can answer it. I did on the programme, and I'm not going to be able to remember what the numbers are. And I do think Labour has a problem in being perceived as somehow as an enemy of wealth creation and entrepreneurship, but it's easy to knit the two together. I have a problem, mate, and I don't know whether you do as well. We worked out how many hours you would have to work in a place like McDonald's in order to earn as much money as someone who had invested, say, $100,000 in the company. And I look at John McDonnell's policies, and I've got a lot of problems with John McDonnell, but this isn't one of them. Employee ownership would make me feel, as a worker, that I have a stake. It's only like John Lewis, mate. You ever been in John Lewis?
Yeah.
Did you feel that you were falling into the clutches of a communist conspiracy when you were looking at tumble dryers?
Not really.
Well, come on, it's a nice business model, isn't it? You see what the Richer Sounds guy did when he retired and handed a significant slice of the business to his workforce? He would have got up at 5:30 in the morning to lug hi-fis out the back of a transit back in the day. I just think it's your workers, you're for workers, right? What would your business be without them?
Well, it's I work just as hard as anybody else.
Just as hard. You should have said harder, really, to get a stronger point. But that's not what I asked you. What would your business be without them?
Well, I wouldn't be able to get the volume of work done that I do. But
and do you think they would take a little bit more pride in their work, or they would bounce in of a morning with even more zest and joie de vivre in their demeanour if they felt that, in a good year they get a bit of the action, and in a bad year they go back to the base rate?
Now, the way I do it, James,
yes,
I pay them on performance. So I mean, everybody that works for me, they're not on shirt patterns; they're on the top rate.
Good.
Everybody is. I pay everybody.
So you give them a share of the profits when the profits are good, then?
Absolutely.
Well, that's all that he's suggesting, really.
On the flip side of that, me being an owner, last night I was working on the tools. Last night I wasn't sitting at home expecting somebody else to come in and do it. I'll go in, I'll get my hands dirty. But when John McDonnell suggests a 4-day working week,
I don't know. I worry that gets inflated in headlines, which are designed, and I'm not patronising you, Charlie, I promise. They are designed precisely to spook you in the way that they have. I can't personally imagine a 4-day week. Can you? Coming up anytime soon?
Well, the amount of tax I pay a year,
yes,
I judge it on this, right? If I went down to a 4-day week, the tax man would get probably the 30 to 40 grand less a year, because I wouldn't be making as much.
And that's what makes it, to my mind, a very silly policy. And we can agree on that. But for you, I sense that the spectre of a Corbyn-McDonnell government is even worse than the spectre of a kamikaze Boris Johnson no-idea Brexit.
I looked in the mirror this morning, and that's exactly what I said to myself.
after saying, "Looking good, Charlie."
It just scares me.
Fair enough. What if it was Ed Miliband?
Ed Miliband, I preferred his brother.
All right, so it's not Labour that you've got to pay. It's not like I could never vote Labour even to stop this looming catastrophe, but I couldn't vote for Corbyn and McDonnell.
What about, what's his name, John, his Deputy Prime Minister?
Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Tom Watson, if he were to, many people think he could make a good fist of it, but then you've got others as well. You've got outliers like Jess Phillips.
I can't work out why he's not running the Labour Party.
Because the members don't want him, Charlie. That's the bottom line, is the members don't want him, and he's got his own sort of court over the waters, really, separate from Corbyn and from Seamus Milne. I shall watch with interest that 4-day week thing, because how would before you go, and I appreciate that the tax you pay would reduce, and that's bad business by most standards. But what about the 4 lads that work for you? How would they feel about a 4-day week?
Well, they'd still want to come in for 6 days. They've all got families to feed.
That's the point that these policies miss, that confuse me. Wage for the idea that people would welcome the chance to be less well off. It may be that I've misunderstood the 4-day week proposal, but You know, it's only relatively recently, a few years, that I stopped saying yes to everything just because you sort of shovel as much into the engine as you can while the train is steaming up the tracks. Charlie, thank you, mate. Thank you for your kindness as well at the beginning. 13 minutes after 11 is the time. There you go. So never. Just couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. And for perfectly valid reasons, actually. There is a perception that a certain brand of Labour politics is an enemy of wealth creation and business. That's the big challenge that John McDonnell faces, of course, as the potential Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I think we could probably say that he's going to need a magic wand to persuade the likes of Charlie to come on board. But even the fact that we had the conversation, I think, suggests that there is a constituency of people who could not really imagine voting Labour in any other circumstances but the circumstances in which Brexit has put Britain. It's coming up to 11:15. I am going to take a few more on this. I just find it fascinating. And I also quite like being able to say I doff my cap to Jeremy Corbyn this morning. I'm not going to tug my forelock, let's not get carried away, but I think he's called it right, actually. A lot of noise, a lot of fuss, a lot of excitement about Joe Swinson. I felt myself wibbling a little on the old Liberal Democrat offer. But this, I think, shoots her fox, so to speak. I think it does, unless you can explain to me why he doesn't. I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit. Now, another quite refreshing position for me this morning is that I would rather he didn't stay neutral. I'd rather he went all out to persuade people that leaving is wrong and silly. Leaving with no deal is insane. But remaining is the best of all available options. It's not heaven. It's not manna. He's not going to do that. So he's not doing what I would want him to do, which means my praise is perhaps even more genuine and sincere when I say I think he's probably picked the best option according to what he needs to do. Your thoughts after this? It's 11:15. Do not laugh, all right? But if I wasn't working today, I would be sitting at home in my dressing gown watching events at the Supreme Court. So we will, of course, keep you up to speed with developments there. I mean, it's even more boring than snooker, but I love snooker as well, so it's an acquired taste. I wonder whether anyone would let me describe Jeremy Corbyn as an acquired taste. It is a taste I have not acquired. I categorically can tell you that. But in the objective examination of the British political landscape, I think he's played a blinder. I think this I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit allows him to avoid David Cameron's fate. This is all presuming that he ever gets into Downing Street. But if he does, then you get another referendum. And that offer, I think, could propel him a little faster towards Downing Street. But if the referendum goes the wrong way, and even now, after all these years and all this chatter, even now I couldn't tell you with any certainty what lies in his heart with regard to the EU. I would point at lifelong stubbornness as a fairly strong indicator that he'd rather leave, but he can't publicly pursue that position because of the party that he leads. And this suggestion, I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit with another referendum, which would help him avoid what happened to David Cameron. He won't have to resign from number 10 if he ended up on the losing side, because he's not going to be on either side. It's just good business, isn't it? 11:21. Annie's in Kilburn. It's just good business, Annie.
Hi, James. I find it astonishing that legitimate journalists like yourself...
let's not get carried away.
Well, all right, journalists like yourself can go on air and actually say that Jeremy Corbyn is a viable proposition for this country. Let us not forget, when you're voting for Corbyn, you're not just voting for one issue, which is Brexit.
No, with respect, I've spent the whole morning saying that is exactly my position.
And you can't, I'm sorry, you cannot separate the man and this political manoeuvre at the moment from a man that has brought his party into a full EHRC investigation for racism, promotes, allegedly, members who are sexually harassing other members, who looks after his inner party. I mean, there are so many things that are wrong with the regime that Corbyn runs now in the Labour Party, that to turn around and say, because he's come forward and said, well, now I'm not going to kind of come down either side on Brexit, even though everybody knows my stance on it, it's just not good enough. Nobody should be able to look away from what that party has become under his leadership and what has allowed to flourish under his leadership.
I think we're having slightly contradicting conversations, and I mean, I've acknowledged the anti-Semitism stench, I think, was... Hang on a minute, I have to talk. I think I used the word stench to describe, in particular, the anti-Semitism issues that still hang around. Well, this is stench is as far as I can go.
Turning around and saying, "Oh, we just got to overcome our squeamishness." This goes
no, it's not.
Squeamishness.
Stench is not squeamishness. So, but let's not get bogged down in pointless semantics. The topic of this morning's conversation is fairly straightforward. If you prioritise minimising the negative impact of Brexit above all else at the moment, then could this offer from Jeremy Corbyn sway you or persuade you? There are plenty of MPs in the Labour Party who would echo every syllable of what you've just said, but they will be asking for votes at the looming general election as well.
Well, this is the point, James. I mean, this is the...
I know, that's why I'm making it. So I'll just finish, if I may.
And you're part of the point, James. You're part of the point.
I'll finish it if I may. So the question of whether or not, if stopping Brexit or minimising the negative impact of Brexit is your top priority at the moment, does this offer appeal? People can answer either yes or no. You've rung me to say it's not my top priority, and that's fine too. But it's not the hang on, it's not the conversation that we're having today.
But you just put words into my mouth. I didn't say it wasn't my priority. It is a priority.
No, top priority. It's clearly not your top priority.
What do you call top? So you're prepared to overlook racism for a top priority?
No, I'm not. I'm not at all. I'm asking callers whether they are, if it is their top priority.
No, you actually turn around.
Let's not have. Are we having an argument about me?
Yeah, we are arguing about you, because when legitimate journalists turn around and say, "I think he may have cracked it," I think this
on this issue, on his Brexit offer.
But history will judge journalists that have allowed this to happen.
Allowed what to happen? A conversation about Jeremy Corbyn's Brexit policy.
No. You know exactly what I'm saying, James, and many, many people who actually do prioritise Brexit but find the man and his regime so appalling.
Which is a constituency I've addressed, described and invited calls from this morning.
In this instance, you haven't. You've used very inflammatory language.
What inflammatory language have I used?
I think Corbyn has cracked it. I actually think
Okay, well, if you think Corbyn has cracked it is inflammatory... if you think that's inflammatory, then
it's overlooking and allowing your listeners...
Right, I'm going to say it one more time, all right? The conversation is about the Brexit policy that Jeremy Corbyn has put out. You're perfectly entitled to say, I hold him in such low regard, I hold him in such disgust that I don't care about any of his policies and I can't believe you're talking about them.
Do you believe his policies? Do you believe this?
That's
Do you not think that regime will say anything to get him into number 10?
No, I think that this offer on Brexit is the final culmination of 3 years of confusion and mess. You are perfectly entitled to... No, this is a pointless conversation. You are perfectly entitled to say, I hold him in such low regard and such low esteem that I don't ever want to discuss anything about him except how awful he is. And that's fine. But that's not my job. My job is to...
a serious conversation.
Oh, come on. My job is to reflect the opinions of hundreds of thousands of people, and now I've reflected yours, and I'm grateful for it.
James, you are a journalist who has a responsibility as well, because you can change hearts and minds. And
so we can't talk about any Labour Party policies while Jeremy Corbyn remains leader?
No, you can't turn around and say, this man has been absolutely amazing on this. Yes, he may have done all of that, which isn't very nice, but you know what? This could be the answer.
I am talking about Jeremy Corbyn's policy. No, this is just silly. I thank you very much for the call. I hope you feel that you've managed to put your case forward. We are talking about Jeremy Corbyn's Brexit policy while describing the stench of anti-Semitism that still hangs around him and his key advisors. So if you are suggesting that stench is so profound we should never discuss any of Jeremy Corbyn's policies, then you're entitled to that position, but I wouldn't be able to come to work every day if you can't talk about the policies of the opposition, Her Majesty's opposition, because the leader is held in such low regard. It's just silly, very silly. 11:26. Sarah's in Plymouth. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Sarah.
So, James, I am a Conservative voter. I'm actually a member of the Conservative Party, but I remain in Europe, absolutely, and I think that Brexit is such a huge issue that trumps everything else, and that is how I will be voting. That's how I'll be deciding how to vote. So, unfortunately, I'm in a situation where I would vote for Jeremy Corbyn.
You are the caller I was looking for, effectively, because it's how tightly you're holding your nostrils, isn't it? And I think that the last caller sort of alluded to that, but she rejects the idea that it would be possible, or that anybody legitimate should even moot the possibility of holding your nose and voting for Jeremy Corbyn. What would you say to Charlie? Because I mean, you know, someone who thinks similarly to you, although not as far down the road of wanting to avoid Brexit. He thinks he'd be voting to bring in a regime that would penalise him as a businessman.
Okay, so Charlie, I'd say I own my own business. I employ people. I'm the managing director of a firm, and my husband also employs people. There are three other factors in my life that a Corbyn government would be detrimental to, which I won't go into. And actually, Brexit wouldn't. I can't see directly how Brexit would affect my life, but I think it's important for the country that we remain in Europe. But I just can't see, having seen Jeremy Corbyn's performance over the past, I don't know how he's been in since 2015? 15, yeah. How he's actually going to have the energy to bring in a lot of the policies that really upset people. And you know, he's going to be, for the first term, the first couple of years, he's going to tie up with dealing with a referendum. So, you know, I can't see that they can actually do that much damage while they're in office. Yeah.
I like your reasoning, but it's risky. You're saying I think he's an absolute liability, but I think he might be too busy to do too much damage. Well, it's the view. 29 minutes after 11, and it's one that if I were a lifelong Conservative voter, which I'm not, I think I'd be close to sharing. Get this dealt with, because it is the most profound threat to the national interest that we've contemplated in peacetime, and of course many people reject that position out of hand, but it happens to be my view. It's coming up to 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think we'll take a few more on this. Every time I think about moving on, I glance at the switchboard and notice that it's groaning under the weight of people waiting to contribute. But some of the other stories that I did and probably still will discuss involve the prospect of cash itself becoming obsolete, and how that could impact much more heavily on the poorer parts of town than anywhere else. I don't know how to do the story about the sports star. I genuinely don't know how to do it. I'm not, I don't think, guilty of... I've probably done it once or twice, but I certainly would try my very hardest not to do it again. When you do one of those questions for the phones where I say, oh, someone else in the media has done this thing, go to our website and look at it, and then tell me whether or not you think they should have done it. Do you see? So how do you talk about the story involving the sports star without talking about the story that the sports star is so cross about? I leave that one with me, all right? This from Cardinal Biggles McFerryface, Esquire. We've got all the greats on this show today. I've just heard out Mr. James O'B talking rollicks on LBC for the first time. I may have slightly edited one of the words in that sentence. I wonder if you can guess which one it was. He thinks that by hiding from the Brexit issue, Corbyn has played a masterstroke. No, James. We need a leader who is unafraid to challenge the fraud of 2016, who has the moral fibre to stand for something. And then, quite winningly, actually, there's a little picture of Groucho Marx and his famous phrase, "These are my principles. If you don't like them, I have others." But we don't have others, unless I'm missing something here. This is a conversation about what the Labour Party, in its current guise, can do with regard to Brexit. And its current guise, unfortunately, still entails Jeremy Corbyn being the leader. This is not a phone-in about, do you wish Jeremy Corbyn wasn't the leader of the Labour Party? He is. Do you wish Jeremy Corbyn didn't become Prime Minister? Of course, lots of people do, including some people who will be contemplating voting for him to become Prime Minister because it's the least bad of available options, and it becomes the least bad of available options because of Brexit. So the suggestion that I will stay neutral and deliver a second referendum, let the people decide, is politically astute. Now, suggesting that a decision is politically astute does not involve any praise of the man who has taken its moral fibre or personality. It's a bit like being good at maths, right? But also being a mass murderer. If a mass murderer did some maths that was really clever and complicated, and I came on the radio and said, blimey, That's an amazing piece of mathematics. It doesn't change the fact that the bloke doing the mathematics is a mass murderer. I don't know that I need to explain this to anybody except the lady in Kilburn. But just in case I do, it's a conversation about the mathematics, not a conversation about the mathematician. And that distinction, I think, also applies to you, Cardinal Biggles McFerryface Esquire. I think that you were legislating for a world in which we could have a choice of leader going into the next election. We don't have that choice currently. We just have him. So with those two immovable objects in place, the question is, what do you think of this bit of political mathematics? I think it's good. But I fully acknowledge that some people hold the mathematician in such low regard that they don't care how good the maths is. This programme is asking about the maths. Thank you. 11:38 is the time. Raymond is in Newton Abbot. Raymond, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. How are you?
Very well, Raymond. How are you?
Oh, well, I'm stressed. It's about 45 minutes to talk to you, and I've had more commercials. But anyway...
I mean, you don't have to stay on hold, mate. We've had 300, 400, 500, 600 people waiting to talk to us at the moment.
But I wanted to talk to you because I think you're right. Whether you agree or disagree, I live in a Teambridge area.
Yes.
Which is Tory or Liberal.
Right.
And our present MP, she's a racist.
Oh, whoa. I can't let you say that on the radio. A, she's not here to defend herself, and B, if she was, I'm sure she'd deny it.
Being reported, it's been in the press.
All right.
Was at a party, she was
let's just... Oh, it's all gone a bit Pete-tong, hasn't it? Let's just steer... No, just talk to me about Jeremy Corbyn's proposal regarding Brexit and the second...
You have to do this,
right.
my opinion.
Yes.
Because the Liberals are getting so much positive press, and there's talk within the media circle of a middle road party.
Yes.
And the trouble is, like the Tories, Labour are worried about the Brexit party. And the problem is that when you do the numbers and the maths and who will get in, the Liberals, they might win Teambridge, or they might win Torbay back, but they're going to win very few seats in reality.
Right.
That's my opinion. So you've got a lot of these MPs that have jumped ship and moved to the Liberals who are going to want a safe seat.
Yeah.
Right? And the Liberals, in fairness, haven't got that many. Now, I think what they're trying to do in the Labour Party, and this is the trouble, what you've quite rightly pointed out, is that the problem with the Labour Party is they're a committee.
Right.
And Corbyn is when you look at his history...
I'm going to disagree with you there. Corbyn's cabinet are not a committee. The deputy leader disagrees with him about almost everything.
Yeah, but the trouble is he's elected. So he's basically...
I quite like elections.
Right? He's got a power base.
He has.
And he hasn't got a role. They never had a role. The deputy leaders never really had a role in any party. But the Labour Party decided that they were going to elect. So he has...
I know. I'm sorry to sound impatient. I just want to push you towards something I can get my teeth into. So the suggestion from the Leader of the Opposition that he will stay neutral on the biggest issue that the country could face, that's a good idea because...
Yeah, because there's so many Labour MPs that are in Brexit seats.
Yeah, no, well, that was what I thought as well. I'm grateful to you for the clarification, Raymond. It does protect him from perhaps alienating his own members, which puts him in the same category as Harold Wilson in the early 70s. And that's, I think, widely regarded as an exercise in effective pragmatism. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I feel bad moving on, Raymond, after you complained about how long it had taken you to get on air, but, needs must. Mike's in Taunton. Mike, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Before we discuss Mr Corbyn's alleged brilliance, I just wondered if you thought your own radio station was trolling you with those government Brexit ads in the middle of your show.
We're not allowed to talk about the adverts on the... on the station, whatever they may be, but
I won't press it then.
No, I think you do need to get ready for Brexit. I think it would be good advice to absolutely everybody. But
look it was going to happen.
Look beyond the headlines and the slogans and take as much information as you can from people who actually know what they're talking about. But anyway, let's crack on.
So I think that if you look at the election results that Labour have had this year, I think that's as a direct result of Corbyn trying to be all things to all people on Brexit. And in trying to do that, he succeeded in being nothing to anyone. So all the Remainers think he's a Leaver, all the Leavers think he's a Remainer.
Yes.
And so he ends up attracting no one. And I think perhaps a more skilled communicator could have pulled that trick off, but that's not Corbyn. And so that's why we keep seeing them crushed.
Because he's never actually stated it.
Yeah.
And now he has.
Well,
so, I mean, I like your phrase, if he'd been a more effective communicator. So if we turn that into the verb rather than the noun, if he had communicated his neutrality more effectively, you're saying, it might have worked. And now he has.
Well, he hasn't done it effectively, has he? No one believes
I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit.
Yeah, well...
how is that open to interpretation? Seems pretty clear to me.
Well, his position has changed so many times over the last few years that whatever he says...
I don't think it has.
...much unbelievable.
I think he's always been... I mean, as you just said yourself, he's never effectively communicated his neutrality. It's not... The problem isn't that his position has changed lots and lots of times. You just said yourself... you just said yourself that his problem was that he hadn't effectively communicated his neutrality.
There wasn't going to be a second referendum, was there? For many years.
So his policies then had to address the world that he inhabited. Yeah. I mean, for me, I love that phrase, and I'm going to keep hitting you over the head with it. That phrase, effective communicator, I agree with.
Yeah.
He should have communicated his neutrality more effectively, but he didn't because, as you've just pointed out, the second referendum wasn't a given. The notion back in 2016 of even suggesting that we'd go back to the people would have been laughed out of court. It would have been potential electoral suicide. So the facts have changed. The sands have shifted. The tectonic plates have moved. Here he is now, looking down the barrel of a highly likely general election, sooner rather than later, with Brexit still the biggest issue facing the country, and his neutrality on the issue. I will stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit. I'll ask you again, how could that have been communicated more effectively than in that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 word sentence?
You just said that his policy hasn't changed, and I'm saying that it absolutely has, because there wasn't going to be a second referendum. It's changed all the way along. So
I didn't say his policy hadn't changed. I said that the absence of a policy, which you described as being an upshot of him not being an effective communicator, was necessary because of the changing political sands. He couldn't have had this policy at the end of 2016. He simply couldn't have done. So I'll ask you again, how could he communicate more effectively his current position than in these 9 words, I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit? That's crystal clear.
No one believes it.
No, you can't say that. You can say, I don't believe it. I'm Mike and I don't believe it. You can't say that no one believes it.
Yeah, not many do, as we've seen.
But you say I don't believe it, even though you rang me to say that that's exactly what his position has been all along. He just hasn't been able to communicate it effectively.
No. Well, the point I'm making is that he's managed to mean nothing to anyone by trying to face in both directions.
He still is. He's facing in both. That's what neutral means, Mike. So you do believe him when he says he's neutral, and you say I don't believe him. He's facing in both directions. He can't.
None of the Leavers believe having a second referendum is neutral, do they?
But that's not a conversation that we're having. Neutral in a second referendum, Mike. I don't know quite how you've managed to get it so wrong. You're telling me that he faces in both directions, but no one will believe him when he says that he's neutral. That you're contradicting yourself in the space of a single sentence.
No.
Yes.
It's not a contradiction, is it?
Of course it is. If you believe he's facing in both directions, you can't not believe him when he says that he's neutral.
He's trying to tell all the Remainers that he's a Leaver, really, winking at them.
No, he's not. He's trying to say, I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit. So I'll ask you for the final time, in 9 words, how could his message be more effectively communicated than that?
You need to start again from the beginning. It's too late now for people to believe anything he says on Brexit.
Except the thing you said, which is that he's been facing in both directions all along. You still believe that, do you, or have you changed your mind in the last 6 seconds?
No, that's absolutely how he's tried to do it, but it doesn't work.
Well, it does when you put it into 9 words. I'll stay neutral and let people decide on Brexit. This is a ludicrous exercise in semantics. I agree with you. He's been facing both ways. I agree with you it's unsatisfying. But I can't agree with you that when he says, I will face both ways and let the people decide on Brexit, you can't believe him, given that you've believed it for the last 3.5 years. Unbelievable. Being the human equivalent of Switzerland is probably the best that Jeremy Corbyn could do, given his true feelings about Brexit, says George. And that's pretty close to my position. But, you know, in the interests of full disclosure, here's Martin. James O'Brien merrily painting Corbyn as a racist. I took a call from Kilburn who said I was being far too easy on him. It's not easy being a radio phone-in host. I met Robin Asquith last night, and if you're of a certain age, you'll know how exciting that is. Robin Asquith, a very, very accomplished actor, but, you know, for good or for ill, he will always be associated with the Confessions films. Although I went to see a screening of Britannia Hospital, Lindsay Anderson's, not his masterpiece, actually. He's made better films than that, but it's still a brilliant film. And it was a really, really fascinating evening. Normally when they say we've got a special surprise guest for you at the end, it'll be the focus puller. Or the bloke that did the catering, but they actually brought in Robin, and it was an absolute joy to meet him. But it did occur to me that they never got around to making Confessions of a Radio Presenter, I don't think, in that series of, or rather euphemistically called sex comedies. Well, there's not a lot of either in today's programme. Not a lot of sex, not a lot of comedy. But I can quite happily take the accusation of having been incredibly easy on Jeremy Corbyn, while also having painted him as a racist and compared him to a mass murderer. The next caller, Martin goes on, says his Lib Dem MP is a racist. They didn't. It was a Conservative MP, but you're obviously paying attention. And O'Brien goes, whoa, you can't say that. She's not here to defend herself. Correct, yes. And Martin adds, what a fraud. Fraud indeed. However, I will ask the question a couple more times before home time today. I want to move on to something a little bit more cheerful. Twitter, as you know, can be a sewer, but it can also be a place of great discoveries and joyousness and happiness. And I saw a story bubbling around a couple of days ago without checking its provenance that I thought might be too good to be true. And it was the tale of a plumber who repaired the boiler of a 91-year-old woman suffering from leukemia and just waived his fee. The story actually is true, and it gets more interesting. James Anderson is that plumber. His company, Deffer Plumbing, is something that we're about to find out a little bit more about. But before we do that, James, just sort of talk us through the details of this particular call-out, if you would.
Yeah, I was asked by the lady's daughter to go and have a look at the boiler on Sunday the 8th of September because the boiler had stopped working. So when I arrived, the daughter was there to meet me, Christine, and the boiler had lost its pressure, so the heating and hot water stopped working. So I repressurised the boiler, got it working again, got the heating and the hot water working again. But then I seen the pressure go down on the boiler pretty fast.
So here you go, James. So there's a problem with that balloon-like thing in the back of the boiler, am I right?
Yeah, that's the one, yeah.
Get in.
And so I done a test on that balloon thing, the expansion vessel, and it come up faulty. So I explained to the lady, we're going to have to order one. They won't have one in stock. So I arranged with her to go back every day up until the 12th, just to make sure the boiler was still working, repressurise it if needed to.
So you've got a leaky, so you can repressurise it, it'll work for a bit, and then you have to repressurise it again. I've been there myself, oddly. That's how I know.
Yeah. Good man. You should be a plumber.
Let's not get carried away, mate.
And I went back, I got the key fob number, so I could enter the property with no one was there. And I went back every day, like in the morning and the afternoon, to repressurise it until we fitted the new part. And now the house is nice and lovely and warm, and she's got no issues at the moment. But when she has them, we'll be back there.
But she didn't know that you were going to waive your fee, did she? She was shocked. No, so you sent an invoice that actually said 0 on it.
I did, yeah. I sent it to her email because I didn't want to give her a written invoice and show it being 0 and her get upset, and then I won't get upset. So I'd rather her be at home when she got the email and the invoice to explain it.
And it's something that you do quite often. In fact, if I've understood this correctly, James, and I'm going to need some help getting my head around this, that's kind of a large part of your business model.
It is the business model. That is the business model. We started in 2017, and we've been growing slowly and steadily, helping people. We've done 2,389 elderly and disabled jobs since then until now. So yeah,
that's what DEFA stands for, Disabled and Elderly Plumbing and Heating Emergency Response.
That's the one, yeah.
And everybody listening is going to wonder how you pay yourself. I mean, if you're doing it all for nothing, how do you wash your face?
We rely on donations from the public. We had £2,000 off the Duchy of Lancaster, the Queen's charity, and we also do nominal jobs anyway.
I see. So you subsidise the what's essentially charity work with normal private work.
Yes. Okay. So the money we get off the normal work pays towards the.
Why are you doing it, James?
Because they deserve it. They're our past, and they give us our future. So they deserve everything that they get. Simple as that. But
everybody listening might agree with that, but they're not going to go out and do a day's work for free as a result. No. And they're good people. I'm just wondering, possibly you're being a bit modest. I mean, what made you decide to take such an extraordinary step with your own business? Because I know you used to run a more conventional private plumbing firm.
I did, yes. There's a lot of people out there that are victims of not having enough funding. Road traders and being in a situation where they don't want to ask for help. They don't want to ask family and friends for help, even though they're struggling. And I want to take that away from that situation and let them understand there's a company there that will be there to help them whenever they need it, and it gives them the independence back. I've seen too many people in that situation that are too proud to ask. But this will then be in place so they don't have to worry about that.
Good man. How can people find out more about what you're doing and maybe even throw you a few quid?
Well, we've got a website, defa.co.uk.
So that's DEPHER.co.uk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we've also got Facebook pages and Twitter pages, and you can find links on there where you can come on and help.
So you've been good, and I'll make a point of tweeting that later as well, but you've been doing this for a couple of years. This is the first time that the spotlight has found you, is it?
It is, yes.
How does that feel? I see your face in the paper today.
I'm overwhelmed. I'm gobsmacked. I pinch myself every now and again just in case I'm having a very nice dream. But it's real.
And this is because Christine went public?
It is, yes. It's because of what Christy. I was in my grandson's christening when she went public with it. And my phone started pinging. I'm like, what's going on here? And then that was it. Skyrocketed.
And you haven't looked back. Well, I hope it continues. I hope the interest continues, and I hope support is sustained once your 15 minutes in the spotlight have passed. A lot of love for you coming into this studio, James Anderson, and I'd like to add to it. We need more people like you around the place. It's coming up to 12 noon, and DEPHER, DEPHER, Disabled and Elderly Plumbing and Heating Emergency Response. He's got plans for the business, I can tell you. He wants to take it countrywide, but if you want to find out more, and maybe, make it entirely on your own basis. That's obviously the first time I've encountered James, and this story is the first that I've heard of him. But if you want to do your own due diligence, then please do, because those kind of stories seem even more valuable than usual in the current climate, don't they?